People who have called off their wedding, why? Story 1. I was 18 and had just had a kid with my first boyfriend. Unfortunately, said boyfriend was abusive as cow, but I'd been putting up with it because I didn't know any better and didn't have family to help me out. The wedding was 2 weeks away, invitations had gone out, I had my dress, everything was ready to go. Then, one night he starts up with his craziness. You never know what sets it off. And I was tired, so I didn't argue back. And when I didn't argue, he runs into my infant son's room, wakes him up by snatching him out of his crib, and threatens to leave with him and never come back. As I'm on my knees, crying and begging him to please give me the baby, and he's holding the screaming child above me like someone holding a piece of steak just out of a dog's reach, I started thinking twice about the whole marriage thing. I did what I had to appease him that night, and the next day when he came home from work, he had no idea where I'd moved to. He did call his mother and tell her to shoot me if she saw me, though. Luckily, she did not. In fact, she was in the process of aiding and abetting my escape at the very moment he called. Fudge that guy. Story 2. This isn't really as messed up as a cheating spouse, but my wife and I almost called off our wedding on account of her mom being a complete controlling and uncompromising bad person. We had been together for almost 10 years when we decided to get married. We both decided to forego a formal wedding and just elope, and then have a celebration after the fact. After deciding this, we decided to call our siblings and parents to let them know. My parents were ecstatic, as was my brother, but when she called her parents, they flipped their cow. They ended up showing up at our house unannounced and proceeded to guilt-trip us into the reasons why we should have a formal wedding. After about an hour of my soon-to-be mother-in-law telling us how selfish we were for not wanting to have a formal wedding, I relented. My rationale at the time was that I could be the bigger person and let her mother have the wedding she thought her daughter deserved. Unfortunately, that's where it all started to go downhill. Once that was agreed, her mom basically went off the deep end and became a controlling and conniving bad person. We started by coming up with the guest list for the wedding. My wife and I wanted to keep the family list to a minimum and have most of our personal friends attend. However, her mom wanted almost none of our friends to come, the bare minimum of my family to come, while inviting all of her personal friends and relatives. We're talking about people my wife and I didn't even know and family that neither of us had ever met. What we had envisioned as a wedding of less than 80 people suddenly turned into almost 300. And so it went. Every time we came up with what we wanted our wedding to be like, it was quickly thrown out the window and replaced by what her mother wanted. To make matters worse, when my wife or I tried to stand our ground and fight for what we wanted, her mother took it as us being ungrateful and basically guilt-tripped my wife into submission. Not only did this make dealing with the wedding a complete pain in peach, not to mention completely ruining any possibility of looking back on our wedding in a positive light, it almost tore our relationship apart due to the crazy levels of stress we both were going through in dealing with her mother. After finally realizing that our wedding wasn't about us at all, and was more about her mom getting the wedding she always envisioned for her daughter and showing off to her friends and relatives, we sat down and threatened to call the whole thing off at the last minute and elope if her mom didn't stop being a complete bad person. Once her mom realized that we were serious, and she knew she would have to explain to all of her friends why her daughter had called off the wedding within a few weeks of the ceremony, she wised up and bit her tongue while we changed her master plans. We ended up having the ceremony, had most of the things we originally planned on, but made concessions to her mother to avoid any further nonsense. However, this did not stop her from making a few unexpected and unknown changes to the ceremony and reception without us knowing. That is, changing the menu, the decorations, the floral arrangements, party favors, and seating assignments. I can't really speak for my wife on this, but for me, the whole thing ruined the wedding for me. Additionally, my wife no longer has the relationship with her parents that she had before all this went down. She used to talk to her parents at least 2-3 times a week and know they're lucky to hear from her once every couple of months. Story 3. After a day of trying on wedding dresses, just me and my maid of honor, we met my family and hubby-to-be at my brother's house for dinner. While showing a picture of myself in a dress to my mother, which was on my BFF's phone, she gets a text message from my fiancé. This is odd because I can see him in the next room and I can see my friend in the kitchen. I read it, of course, and it's a huge confession from him to her, addressing how they had fooled around a few weeks ago, and he was really regretting he hadn't taken things further with her. He had no idea I had her phone in my hand. I simply stood up and walked the 10 feet to him, held up her phone and looked him in the eye. The look on his face was priceless. And when I could speak I and nigh entire family, let them both have it verbally. We're black, so you can imagine that was quite the showdown. Needless to say, I don't speak to either of them anymore. Story 4. The lies! Oh my goodness, the lies! Here's some background. My fiancé had baggage. I knew that. As in, I was going to be okay with becoming stepmom to 3 children, a daughter-in-law to 2 crappy parents, and sister-in-law to a stupid mess of a woman, and knew that I would be bringing home the bacon. I even bought a house that would be big enough to house him and the 3 kids. But he told me he never married his baby mama, and that he would leave my house at night for occasional night shift work as a cop. I asked to see the court decision regarding the kids, just so I knew what was going on. He kept the first page from me that read divorce decree. So when his parents made a second marriage comment, I was thrown for a loop. This was a pretty big thing to keep from your wife-to-be in 6 months. I told him to leave, and he swore up and down that was the only thing he lied about. I called his employer, and it turns out he's not a cop either. So I have no idea where he went when he left the house that I was paying for, and I immediately went to get tested. Yeah, the flipping lies. Story 5. My fiancée started having an affair with her supervisor. I found the conversations when she forgot to log off of Facebook one day. I worked my peach off for about a month to try to win her back, but eventually gave up. We broke up. She went on a couple of dates with him. He tried to fudge her, and she stopped halfway. She had always been very conservative about close relationship, because she wasn't ready. He got angry and refused to talk to her ever again. That was about 3 days before I moved out of state. She begged for me to come back. No luck. We were in the planning step. We had only been engaged for about a year, and money was a bit of an issue. So fortunately, aside from a few minor things, the ring being the most expensive thing at that point, we hadn't put much money out on it. Story 6. I'm thinking of doing exactly this. My fiancée is very abusive to me verbally, and I've shut down from wanting to talk or have close relationship with her. We got engaged last November after dating for 2.5 years. But after moving in, she wants to argue with me several times a day and regularly tells me how she can always find something that I do that makes her angry each day. She's 33 and a PhD, I'm 35 and a business owner in video games. I feel like I'm exploring new depths of my reservoir of patience, and I go out of my way to diffuse her temper, which rarely works. I've typically been a happy, kind person, but feel like a wilted flower whose spirit has been sapped by her negativity. I fully admit I'm working up the courage to end the engagement, move out of the home, and just enjoy some alone time, peace, and then begin to heal and move on to a better life. Sorry for the venting. It's tough to admit this to friends and family, as most everyone thinks things are going well. Story 7. I have some friends who had no choice but to cancel their wedding due to poor planning and trying to get their cake and eat it too. Here is what not to do when planning a wedding. 1. They decided on an in-state destination wedding, a spot 4 hours away. They also sent save the dates out to guests. 2. After already putting down a deposit and not really budgeting what they needed to for a wedding, the groom was fired for watching censored photos at work. 3. Because of new money issues, they decided to cut the guest list over half. People who were cut received a mass email saying they were uninvited due to financial reasons. Why they didn't personally call people is beyond me. 4. The next day after rejection letters went out, all the women still got a bachelorette party invite. Everyone but one person on that guest list were cut from the wedding. I never saw so many declines in a matter of an hour. 5. The following day, everyone who was cut from the wedding got an invite to a wedding blessings party. In a nutshell, a consolation potluck party for not making the cut to the wedding. We are registered for gifts at this place, yada, yada, yada. At this point, my wife was so irate. We were uninvited to the wedding, where we already put a non-refundable deposit on a hotel. Then we are invited to the bachelorette party, which cost $400 and a blessing party, and we're expected to buy a gift. My wife made me write the groom a nasty letter telling him to stop inviting us to things after uninviting us to the wedding. I heard that I was not the only one to write a letter like this. 6 days later, we are told that the blessings party and bachelorette party were canceled because 90% of the guest list declined. The bride-to-be was so upset, embarrassed, and so hurt by the decisions made by the groom, she decided not to marry him. She canceled the wedding entirely. Moral of the story: plan out your wedding properly and don't look at censored photos at work when you have a $80,000 plus a year's salary while trying to plan a destination wedding. Story 8. My best friend was going out with his high school sweetheart for 10 years. They were 25 when they got engaged. They had both been each other's first. This guy did everything for her, and she was sweet to him also, but she was very flirtatious and whatnot. One day my buddy comes over and tells me that his girlfriend is at a supper with some hockey players from the Tampa Bay Lightning. So I'm like, dude, hockey players are known to fudge everything that moves. Aren't you worried? And he tells me that she is just there to wingwoman one of her friends. So the next day we are all at supper together, and jokingly I ask my friend's girlfriend, "So does Brad Richards have a big banana?" My senseless humor was accepted and well appreciated by this group of friends, and she replies nervously with a laugh, "Yeah, Will Dill, it was huge." So we laugh about it and carry on. 3 months later, 1 week before their wedding day, she finally admits to him that she had slept with Brad Richards. She told him like this, "You know when Will Dill asked me about Brad Richards' banana? Well, I wasn't lying. I did sleep with him. I'm so sorry, blah, blah, blah." Turns out after their little hockey player supper, they all went to the hotel and had a dildo fest with 2 other girls and 3 of the players. Needless to say, my friend dumped her peach and now hates hockey with a passion. Edit. My friend gave me a valuable piece of advice out of this: never ask for details. You don't need asterisk to know what color the dildos were, what size if there was butt plugs involved, which there was. Story 9. Too many I know somebody who posts. I called off my wedding. I called it off because I realized we weren't ready to make a marriage work. There are a number of skills that a couple needs to have before they can really succeed in a relationship that's meant to last a lifetime. These skills are pretty obvious: compromise, forgiveness, sacrifice, and an acceptance of the things you don't like but can never change. Shortly before the wedding, I realized that we didn't have those skills. That made me extremely uncomfortable with the prospect of going through with it. And ultimately, I couldn't bring myself to start something that I knew couldn't last forever. The mistake we made was getting engaged before we knew we had those skills, before we were ready. We gave ourselves a long engagement with the idea that we'd have time to figure out those skills before the big day finally came. But we didn't realize that it put a timer on our relationship, which essentially turned it into a time bomb. When the day came, we were either going to be ready or we were going to have a very bad time. Eat it. Thank you very much to whomever donated the gold. You're all very kind. Story 10. Too many reasons to list. She was a wonderful person, but she got cold feet and stopped talking to me. Later, she left me for one of our friends. We were really close, and it was devastating to me that she couldn't come and talk to me, that she didn't trust me enough to sit down and talk things out. I guess she was scared, or she simply wasn't attracted to me anymore. I don't really know. The pain of that loss still haunts me, and I still feel the madness coming on every once in a while, but it has been almost 5 years, and I finally feel like myself again. I hope she is happy, though. All my friends think I hate her. I don't hate her. I just hope she was able to find what she needed. I talked to her for a while after we split up. We were friends again for a bit, but I couldn't deal with interacting with the guy she left me for because he was the kind of person that thought he did nothing wrong, when in fact he helped to push us to our breaking point by pretending to be helpful to us during our difficult time, all the while acting as a wedge between us. To this day, any time I see him, I get urges to tear him apart, a quiet rage in my head that I ignore because I know it isn't worth it. I don't hate her. She apologized and tried to help me even though I was pretty much out of my head, insane with grief during the months after we split up. By far, it was the hardest thing I've gone through in life so far. Death I can accept, but knowing she is alive and well, and that she is no longer a part of my life in any capacity is the hard part. Story 11. Was going to get married in March 2012 and called it off in January of that year. Basically, it just came down to a disagreement on what we wanted out of life. I was 23 at the time. Would have been 24 at the wedding. She was 27. She wanted kids, like almost immediately. I told her that we needed to wait on that. I'm still in college. I wanted to get a job and a home and whatnot first, but she was completely unwilling to compromise on it. She demanded that we have kids before she was 30, so within a year or two of the wedding, and there's no way that I would be ready for kids by 25, 26, especially as I'm still working on college. This was causing more and more of a divide between us. And I knew that if we had gotten married, that either I would have gotten what I wanted and we would have waited for kids and she would have resented me, or she would have gotten what she wanted and we would have had kids. And both, I would resent her, and we would have a kid or kids that we were unprepared to take care of. I still miss her every day, though, and always wonder if I made the right decision. Story 12. It's a long story, I know, but what you are about to read is the story about how I saved my life. I was in a relationship with a longtime BF, 7 years, when we got engaged. I just finished school, and we had been together for so long, so it was the next step. Important note, I am Costa Rican. Women here are raised to be wives. Even educated women that go to college and have a degree are expected to a quiet, lovely girls who worships her man and caters to him. So I did exactly that during my relationship with this turd. I was really young when I met him, so that gave him time to mold me to his preference. It got to a point where I believe it borderlined abuse. For example, when I was going somewhere, I had to call him and ask him which road to take. Or I could only go to the movies with him. If I did anything without him, he would get mad at me. I often had to dumb myself because he said I often offended him with my comments. And I did all that. I did. Not only because I viewed it as normal, but because I honestly and truly believed that this was IT, that I should take it because this was my only shot at being loved. See, I've never been a pretty girl. I'm not ugly, but I'm not pretty, and I have a personality. Boy, do I have one, and that is a bad quality for a girl. So I dumbed myself and repressed my personality and played along. Anyway, we got engaged and decided we were going to get married in a year. A couple of months later, I found out he's cheating on me. We fight, he apologizes, I forgive him. He then proceeds to be a total cow for the next months, increasingly controlling and just being downright mean. And I took all this. I remember that I was out with him and some friends one night, and he was particularly mean to me that day. We left and got on the car, and I just started sobbing, and he apologized. He always did after being a banana. And I told him, I always thought that when I got married, I would be in love. And it was true, I did not love him anymore. I had fell out of love with him slowly. And those words at that moment became the first step on the ladder to leave him. I then got a job. He was not happy about that because with a job comes independence and comes self-worth, things that I needed. I started feeling that there was life without him. And then I found out that he had some loans he hadn't told me about. And that was it. That was the last straw. Something I can't explain came over me. I suddenly had the courage to leave him. I made up my mind. There was no more forgiving. I called it off. We broke up. This was the hardest thing I had to do in my life. This was me standing up for myself. This was me going against everyone in my life. Invites were sent, places were booked. I didn't give a fudge. My family was devastated, but I was happy. Oh, I was so happy. And everyone was so mad at me because I was happy. But they didn't know. They had no idea what I had been going through for the last few years, so they thought it was inappropriate for me to be so happy. After that, I did things that are unheard of for women in my family. I became independent, got an apartment, traveled on my own, started reading and listening to the music I wanted, and basically letting me be me. I lost friends and family after this decision, but it was worth it. I am such a happy person now, almost 30 and successful in my work. I still hope a man will come by that likes smart, independent, opinionated women that will love me. But I have also made peace with the fact that it may not happen, and am happy and proud of myself, and I am truly living the best years of my life, and that's what matters. Story 13. I don't think I've seen this one yet. Emotional affair. We were together for 7 years, and were getting married in a few months. We'd already bought a house and started tying our lives together. She was emotionally distant for some time, but I ignored it like a fool in love. Eventually, I noticed she was spending significant time chatting with a guy she met on World of Warcraft. She was also taking phone calls from a friend in private. I called her on it, and our wedding was off the next day. We bought our house during the mortgage bubble, and now I'm stuck with an underwater mortgage on a house that's lost 50% of its value. I also still have the ring. It's been almost 5 years, and I'm still not sure what to do with it. Story 14. A friend of mine was engaged to a girl. He was your typical SAP. He'd been on literally dozens of first dates from a Cupid, and had had no luck with the ladies. Really nice guy, but completely socially lacking. She turned out to be a pathological liar. She was an army vet. She practiced underwater knife fighting. She came from old money, but her part of the money had been spent on an incredibly lavish wedding ceremony. She had a daughter, or maybe she didn't, or maybe the girl was her niece or her friend's kid. She was military police. The lies got so bad that she decided to move across country in the middle of the night with my friend to avoid a warrant out for her arrest. Fraud and impersonating a police officer. She told him that there were jobs for both of them waiting there with her family business. He had been working on a PhD, but had dropped out at her suggestion, so he wasn't working at all, and they were broke. So they moved in with her mom, and there weren't jobs for either of them. I think to distract him from that fact, she told him she was pregnant. A miracle. He proposed. The ultrasound photo she showed him showed up on the first page of Google image results for ultrasound. He finally broke it off. He called his dad to get some money to fly home. She called him a few weeks later from jail to talk about their baby, and how she was going to get an abortion if he didn't get back together with her. The lady, she was nuts. Story 15. We were both fairly young. I was 21, he was 23. We were responsible, self-sufficient. We bought a house together. He was my first kiss, and I was head over heels. We got engaged 4 years into the relationship, and then everything started falling apart. He started to get controlling, no longer wanting me to go out with friends or even my sister. When it came to me telling him we just couldn't afford a new TV or some other non-essential, he would pout and withhold love. If I wasn't perfectly happy, he wouldn't talk to me. I was considering breaking it off when he decided that he wanted to try anal, whether I wanted to or not. The only thing I could think of through the pain and tears was that this was only going to get worse. I was devastated that the person I loved would just keep going while I was begging him to stop. Breaking off my engagement was the best decision I ever made. I've gained all of my confidence back and happier than I ever was in that relationship. I'm never settling again. I deserve better. Story 16. You know that Bridezilla show? Pretty much was like that. Yeah, this is a friend of mine. Sorry. Well, this bakery had a thing of not doing wedding cakes because the brides typically go over them no matter how perfect they are and demand alterations on the very day of the wedding that have nothing to do with the original description of the cake. My friend's fiancée, though, she was friends with the owner of the bakery, so she decided to make it just to be nice. Part of her gift for the wedding, a free cake. The bride went absolutely over the cake. She was screaming and yelling and in tears over this cake. This was the day before, so the friend trying to be nice decided to remake the cake from scratch and got zero sleep that night working on it. Me, the bride, and groom were in the bakery there to pick up the cake the next day. And she just got so angry she picked it up and threw the cake over the counter where there were several customers, screaming her lungs out over how her friend ruined her wedding and how awful the cake was. She then turned to the groom and said, "What are we going to do about the wedding now?" In which the groom responded with, "What wedding? I wish I had a camera, holy fudge." They were both black, and it was a black neighborhood, so the store pretty much turned into an episode of Maury or Jerry Springer. Story 17. I had to call mine off because the man I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, or so I thought, decided to sit me down the night before and tell me all about the trysts and flings he had been having throughout our relationship together. He said if he doesn't come clean now, he would not be able to live with himself. After the list was done, I was crying my eyes out. He said something along the lines of, "Well, I didn't think you would take it this hard." Seriously. We were going to have a huge wedding, even though I really didn't want a huge one. Weird, I guess, but I never envisioned my wedding growing up like other little girls. So I had to call tons and tons of people and tell them it was off. Listen to them try to console me over the phone and crying every time I hung it up. He told me he didn't want to call anyone because he was so upset with me calling it off. He didn't want to see me ever again. That worked because I found someone who actually loves me, and we have been married for 3.5 years with a beautiful 2.5-year-old son. And he has never cheated on me. I never thought I could trust again, but I'm still slowly getting over that fear after all these years. It was 12 years ago. Story 18. My fiancée called it off when she found out I wasn't rich. Apparently there's a guy with the same name as me who is heir to this huge fortune, whereas I'm just some idiot from a lower middle-class family. She came into my life like a dream, and I was so taken with her I thought that it was like a fantasy come true. When she met my family and found out who they were, she literally ran from the house. I had to track her down and found out after the fact that she was trying to get with someone she thought was an heir. I did a lot of growing up that year. Fortunately for me, she didn't get what she wanted either. The guy she was after turned out to be boy, and she now makes a living waiting tables. Story 19. 35 years ago I did that. I was a young naval officer and set to marry the girl I fell in love with at college. I got cold feet 3 days before the event and canceled it. It wasn't because I had had second thoughts about her. It was the stupid idea that I thought I could either be a good husband or a good submarine officer. I didn't think I could do both. About 9 months later, I got a call from her, about 1,000 miles away, and I found out that she had a new boyfriend. It just devastated me. I did everything I could to regain her confidence, but it took almost a year. During that year, I was stationed at the submarine base in Bangor, Washington, and she was 2,400 miles away in Cincinnati, Ohio, with that POS rich boyfriend hounding her daily. It really took a toll on me. I had many sleepless nights imagining the worst. I didn't give up, though. A few months before we were scheduled to relocate to Submarine Squadron 1 in Pearl Harbor, I took a chance and drove to Cincinnati. I convinced her to come back to Bangor with me and made the trip through the Southwest and then back up the California coast along the Pacific. It was as much like a honeymoon as I could make it on my limited salary, and it was memorable. By the time we reached Washington, Mount St. Helens erupted. We were on the highway about 40 miles from it when it blew. The sky just turned black and the mud flows washed out the bridges north of us. We were rerouted along the coast and finally made it to Bangor. She had to return to Cincinnati, but this time it was with the plan to return to Washington. When she flew back, we eloped with a justice of the peace. That was almost 33 years ago. We have 3 sons, and we couldn't be happier. Our boys are all grown up, and I'm not far from retirement. Marrying her was the best, smartest thing I ever did. Story 20. Together 4 years, engaged for 3 months. He thought it would be a good time to tell me that he was attracted to children in addition to adult women a few days before the rehearsal. Maybe he thought I'd be too distracted with the planning. Maybe he couldn't hold it in any longer, I don't know. He didn't talk to me for a few days after that. So, confused and messed up to my core, I told my dad, who told me to call it off, which I did. After 2 weeks. He basically disappeared, making everyone think he had cold feet, and then came back as though it would just be fine, if a little weird. It was not pretty. Edit. Okay, apparently some people think I'm Goebbels or some cow, so I'd like to clear some stuff up first. Firstly, pedophilia is not comparable to homosexuality on the basis that A, children can't consent, and B, it's a paraphilia. It's neither a fetish, nor a kink, nor a attractiveness. And it's insulting that you could think otherwise. Secondly, I am not a terrible human being for refusing to enter a lifetime commitment with someone that I couldn't trust. I didn't terminate him, I let him go. As far as I know, he is still alive and capable of dating other women who are willing to accept the risk of raising children with him. Thirdly, I know the difference between a child molester and a pedophile. I ended at * because he was a pedophile. If he was, in fact, a child molester, I would have hauled his peach to the station with the quickness. Story 21. So a friend of mine will say Becca was due to get married last year on August 10th. I went to her bridal shower where over and over she gloated how she would be marrying, we'll say, Mike, in just over a week, and how lucky she was, and how none of us were as lucky as she was. Yes, she is that full of herself. So, about 4 days before the wedding, she blasts on her Facebook about how the wedding has been postponed, and then a few hours later how it has been postponed indefinitely. Turns out, another former friend of hers had a video of her boyfriend and Mike having close relationship. Mike found out Becca knew, and got all his stuff and left. About a month later, Mike gets into a car accident and claims he has amnesia of all the events and thought they were married. Becca, who is stupid and Mormon and needs the husband, decides to get back with him. She is now about 6 months pregnant. They are not married, and he still claims that he has forgotten everything, including the close relationship he had with another guy. Story 22. I went on my first date at the age of 23. Having never been in a relationship before, I thought everything was going well. About 3 months in, we got pregnant. She told me that she was on the pill and that it was possible that she couldn't even get pregnant. This was a shock to my system, and we separated briefly following the announcement. We got back together, though, and really tried to make it work. My daughter was born in August, very near our 1-year anniversary. My daughter is the greatest person in the world, and she's done more for me than she'll ever know. I've learned so much through her about responsibility and being an adult. Shortly after my daughter's birth, her mother began pushing the marriage issue, and I saved up to buy a ring. I proposed, and for some time it made things better between us. The situation was just too difficult, though. We had nothing in common other than our daughter. Before long, she was again being verbally and psychologically abusive to me, but having never been treated like that, I didn't understand what I was doing wrong. I began seeing a therapist, which helped me realize that I wasn't in a healthy relationship. Finally, after an argument in which she threatened me with physical violence, I knew that things were just too toxic to continue. I definitely looked like the bad guy, but I had to make the best choice for the future of all those involved. The most difficult part was coming to the conclusion that this situation continuing around my daughter would actually be worse for her than us being apart. Story 23. I called off my wedding 3 months before it happened. Why? I was a 17-year-old. I'd have been 18 at the time of the wedding, about to marry a 26-year-old man that had been dating me for 3 years. I was a victim about to marry her abuser. The engagement ring, which I did eventually find out was fake. He has money. Lots of it, but that didn't matter to me, was to buy my consent/silence/whatever as he stuck his banana in everything that moved. He was an alcoholic, a narcissist, a pedophile. Seriously, I wasn't a 14-year-old that looked like an 18-year-old. I was a 14-year-old that looked like a 12-year-old. I loved him because I thought he was saving me from my horrid situation with my family. My mom and I moved in with her boyfriend, only to find out too late that he was an abuser. He'd take me away from it, even if it was just for a little while. I was so messed up. I ended up living in a boarding house when things finally broke in my abusive household because, of course, I was 17 and he didn't want me to move in until I turned 18. His career depended on a squeaky clean image. I ended up pregnant, having a violent end to my pregnancy that resulted in my daughter's stillbirth. Despite this all, I loved him, but he started picking at my appearance. I was gaining too much weight, even though I was at a healthy weight for my age height. I had gotten hips and breasts, so we talked about dieting. I stopped eating. I drank water when I'd get hungry. Everything had to be low fat, low calorie, no calorie, and sugar-free. It worked. I went from healthy to underweight. What made me realize that I wanted out was a box of chicken wings. I ended up moving back in with my mother after she was able to escape her ex. We lived near an indoor flea market, farmer's market, that had the most amazing food vendors. I love food, and this diet was terminating me. I was flipping miserable. So I decided to have a cheat day, and I went and ordered a box of hot wings from the chicken place in the farmer's market. As I sat down with my favorite movie, eating my favorite food, I realized that the extreme dieting would always be my life. I also realized that he wanting me to be so unhealthy wasn't right. I was tired all the time, cold all the time, hungry all the time. I decided, while happily munching on that box of wings, I was done. I called him, told him that I was done. It took me another 3 years to truly be done, but the very expensive wedding was done and over. He never got any deposits back. It took me almost a decade to realize that he wanted me to look like a 14-year-old forever. I was also always dismissive about the age difference, citing that I was mature for my age. I now realize it didn't matter. I was a child. Story 24. I was about 2 months away from getting married to someone I'd been living with for about a year. I was getting fitted for my wedding dress when I looked in the mirror and thought to myself, I really hope he and I can stay friends after we're divorced. Then I thought, wait, did I really just think that? I got honest with myself and realized that at most, I had lukewarm feelings for this guy, and that I only had been thinking about the wedding day but not the marriage or the life we were going to live together. I was 21 and just wanted to get married without having really understood what that meant. I called it off, moved away, and met the love of my life 3 months later. We've been together for 11 years now, married for almost 4, and are expecting our first baby this summer. Best decision I ever made. Story 25. I called off my engagement because the moment I stopped being his girlfriend and started being his future wife was the moment I stopped being a person to him and became his property. He hit me, he forced himself on me, he tried to stop me talking to my family or friends. It was scary and I loved him and was so confused. We'd been together years and he was so nice, what on earth happened? I spent a few months trying to fix it back to how it was before the engagement, then gave up and ran away. He wasn't going to change, and even if he did, I couldn't forgive him anymore. We hadn't set a date yet, our families couldn't agree on location, style, or season, and he just wanted right now registry office, which nobody but him wanted. Story 26. First of all, we were too young. We had been living together for a few years, were serious about each other, and felt like it was the next step. We got engaged, planned the wedding for the next summer. Paid tons of deposits, I had a dress and everything. The entire time it felt off, just stressful, and I constantly had this what if I'm making a huge mistake feeling. I should have listened to it sooner, but 4 months before the big day I called it off. His drinking candy use had gotten extremely out of control. I realized I couldn't fix him, and as much as it hurt, I knew that we'd never have a happy life with his addiction issues. I moved my stuff out that next day and told him to leave me alone and never talk to me again because I needed a clean break. That fall, I started grad school and started a new life without him. Several months after we split, he contacted me telling me he'd been in AA for a couple months and needed to make amends as part of his program. I went back to our old place to meet him and saw a different man than I had ever seen. It's been almost 2 years since we split, called off our wedding, and he's been sober that entire time. I'm happy to say we're getting married this summer, and this time everything feels right. I have gone to at least 1 meeting a week with him, and while I know he's never cured of alcoholism, the fact that he got sober in spite of me, not because of me, increases the likelihood that he'll keep at it. For anyone considering calling off their wedding, I implore you to do so. The wedding train is a tough one to jump off of once it leaves the station, but it can be done, and I'm happy to talk to anyone who has questions. Story 27. This is about a coworker and friend. She, who I'll call Cindy, was 21 at the time. Her soon-to-be husband, who I'll call Ed, was 24 at the time. They have dated for about a year until Ed proposed to Cindy. They were a happy couple. Everything was going right for them. They were the type of couple that will always talk about their SO and brag about them. That was until Ed brought up the prenup agreement. Before continuing, let me just say that Cindy comes from a very wealthy family. Ed isn't on good terms with his family, and they aren't very wealthy, but he has a bright future ahead of him, and he is a smart and diligent worker. Also, Cindy's father is a very prominent figure in Ed's field of work. They never talked about a prenup, and all of a sudden, Ed gets his own lawyer to prepare a prenup and presents it to Cindy. The terms basically said that if they were to break up, the house, the kids, major property like cars, furniture, etc. would all be Ed's. Cindy was very distraught about this. She got her own lawyer and tried to propose a revised prenup that would be on equal terms for both of them. Ed and his lawyer rejected it right away and would not budge on their terms. This was when things got bad. Cindy's father was paying for most of the wedding. He was going to pay the down payment on their first home, and he has also helped Ed previously by helping him buy a car. So considering all this, it just didn't seem right. Ed's argument was that he would be the main financial provider in the family, and thus he should be entitled to the property and kids. Anyways, Cindy called off the wedding about a month before the date. Ed tried to reason with Cindy. He wanted to get back together and go forth with the marriage. However, he still would not budge on the prenup terms. Cindy obviously refused to listen to him and cut him out of her life. She was very depressed and felt humiliated since people in our work industry heard about it. I think she got through it just fine, since so many people supported her. Story 28. I was to be married in June of this year. We had been dating for about 4.5 years, living together for almost 2. I called it off a few weeks back. There were a lot of issues in our relationship, communication being one of the biggest, along her with violence and anger issues. Instead of things staying the same or getting better after I proposed, things got worse. A lot worse. Fighting all the time. No close relationship. I didn't even want to be around her. It got to the point that I would dread having to go home when I knew she was there. I would find any excuse not to go home or to stay out later. I went away on vacation for a week without her back in January. After a whole week of not thinking about her or missing her in the slightest, I realized that this was not the person that I could spend the rest of my life with. She was not my best friend, and a lot of the impetus for both moving in with her and proposing was pressure from her to do so. I still care about her and want her to be happy. I just knew that I couldn't be the one to do so. It was a tough breakup, because there was a lot of emotion from her side. She wasn't willing to accept that I wasn't happy in the relationship, and although she offered to work to make things right, I felt the relationship had run its course. I moved out a couple weeks ago and I couldn't be happier. Story 29. I was in an incredibly abusive relationship. In fact, the only reason I said yes to begin with was for fear of what would happen if I said no. My fiancé at the time left for 3 months, and since he had alienated me from all of my friends, I started hanging out with the soon-to-be best man of our wedding, because I knew nothing would be inappropriate, and my fiancé wouldn't mind. Soon after, the best man and I fell in love, and then we found out that his ex and my fiancé had been cheating on us with each other for years. After we found that out, we no longer felt the guilt for how we felt about each other. I called off the wedding, and almost 2 years later, I married the best man. We've now been in a very happy, respecting, and loving relationship for 2 years, and I learned how love should be. Story 30. Long story short, I met a girl. She seemed great. Accepted me and my past as it was and supported me through the tail end of it. She opened up about her past, and I did everything I could to support her through it. After about a year, I purposed and things were going well, but then took a dramatic turn for the worst. She became furious for me hanging out with friends who still smoked, tore a chunk out of me for being late to a dinner at Boston Pizza. Nothing special, just regular dinner. Told me I needed new clothes, music taste, and had to make at least 6 figures in order to take care of her. The real kicker was when she tried to get me to stop talking to my family about wedding plans and what I wanted to do career-wise. She said it wasn't any of their business. Things kept getting worse, and I realized how controlling she was. She left me a few days after Valentine's Day saying I wasn't ready because I didn't have my career in order and couldn't be mature enough to stop my hobbies because they were childish. Going to concerts, playing darts at the pub with my dad, etc. I was confused as cow and broken. A few weeks later, she started seeing other guys and going to clubs pour out the water drunk, but still tried to convince there was hope for us once my life was on track. After coming home from a summer job as a camp counselor, I told her that it was completely over, even though she left me first. Story 31. 2 weeks before the big day is when I called off my wedding. It all went down the weekend after her bachelorette party. Speed up to late Monday morning. I get a phone call from her maid of honor. May have been the only call I had ever received from her. Can't remember how I felt, but I can still replay that moment. Anyway, she tells me, "You cannot marry crazy bad person." She then begins to explain that at the party all of her lies caught up with her. She had about 3 small different groups of friends together sharing stories. While out and about doing what they do, different stories from different friends started running into each other. It's hard for me to explain, but one example is when she claimed to have a modeling contract at an agency. Then another friend would say, "No, she doesn't have a modeling contract. I do with that agency." Basically, she used her friends' stories as her own. After the conversation, I was stunned for a moment. I felt empty but emotionless. The next thing I remember is walking back to my computer on the sales floor and changing passwords to important accounts. I told my manager that I had to leave. My reason? "I'm not getting married anymore, sir. It was good enough." After I got out of there, I went and talked to the priest. Told him the wedding is most likely not going down. Called the reception hall. That guy was pissed because I was supposed to write him a check the next day. Lost the deposit, though? I meet up with the maid of honor, another bridesmaid, and a friend. They took her out to dinner to confront her about everything while I tried to move as much cow out of the apartment as I could. I had help from the friend while getting cow out of the apartment, filled up my cars, and drove to my parents. My mother was shocked, but happy cause she hated her. My fiancé called when she got back, but I didn't answer. Didn't even talk to her for a few days. In hindsight, I could see all her lies. Some things seemed a little unbelievable, but she was always able to back it up when I started to get curious. I dodged a huge freaking bullet. Edit, grammar.